Hello folks, it is Tuesday the 16th of March. Yes, it's not a Friday. I always knew Fridays were going to be a mistake. Coming up on this week's episode of This Week, which talks predominantly about what happened last week. We're at Formula One testing. We're going to run through everything that went down and all 10 teams as I give you my opinion on who's looking good for this 2021 F1 season. But it's not just F1 that's been testing. We'll also look at MotoGP. IndyCar have been testing, well, Ganassi to put it into context. We'll also look at Formula E and some controversy shaking up there. We'll look at BTCC and NASCAR, all coming up this week, where we talk about last week's action on this week's episode of This Week. Hello then gang, and welcome to this week's episode of This Week, coming a few days later, as I said, and I think we're probably going to have to start doing them either on a Monday or a Tuesday after a race weekend, because as I learned and as I quickly discovered at the Formula One test last week, there just ain't going to be the time to do it, film it, upload it on a Friday. Thank you for your continued support, for all your comments, for all your questions. Thanks to those of you who have subscribed and hit that notification button. Thanks to those of you who have purchased the merchandise. Yes, we have a merch line. It is down the bottom of this video. You see that stream of pictures with all that beautiful merchandise? That's WB merchandise. You can get your hands on it. There's a separate US and UK shop, and 20% of all sales are going to charity. Let's start this week off though by talking Formula One, by talking the test session which has just taken place in Bahrain. 3 days in Sakir, that's all, down from the 6 days or 8 days or however many days we've had in the past. Just 3 days testing, which accounted for just a day and a half per driver, unless you were at Williams, in which case they had just 1 day per driver because their tester, Roy Nissany, had day one. Some big regulation changes in Formula One, of course, between last year and this. It was supposed to be a carryover year from 2020 to 2021, but some regulation changes, particularly to the back of the floor area, to try and slow the car down, tied in with harder tyres being brought in by Pirelli, again to try and slow everybody down, created some headaches for all of the teams over the winter. They've recouped pretty much all of the downforce that they've lost. Testing times not too far away from what they were running in the Grand Prix, and Pirelli thinking that we're going to have new lap records by the end of the season. Let's take a look at what happened team by team though, and we're going to start with Williams, who actually had a really good week of testing. Pretty much trouble-free, actually. All 3 drivers getting out on track. George Russell, though, claiming that the team has intentionally taken its car down a development path, which means it will be yo-yoing, I think were the words he used. Some races great, some races terrible. They've essentially focused in on a couple of races where they believe they can be successful with this car and optimize this car for those particular circuit characteristics. Looking to last season and Haas scoring 3 points and Alfa Romeo scoring 8, they've taken a bold, I'd say risky option of just focusing in on maybe 3 or 4 tracks where they think they can score points and just dialing the car into that. If it doesn't work on those tracks, then the season is lost. As I said, it is unconventional, hugely risky, but if it pays off, it could be pretty good. Overall though, the car looked better. It's a big step forward for the team in terms of last year. The car's very susceptible to the wind, so yeah, it's a massive risk what they've done. Season, but they do have a brand new Ferrari engine in the back. All the teams that are running the Ferrari engines reported much more happiness with it in comparison to what they had last season. Both Haas drivers, they're rookies, getting through the program, despite the fact that on the first day, Mick Schumacher only put, I think, 15 laps on the board, so a tough start for him. They were slowest of all, though, in the test, and the team I don't think has much confidence of being able to make up for that as the season gets underway. Now to a team who spent the vast majority of last year at the back of the field fighting to hang on to that midfield pack. We talk, of course, about Alfa Romeo. They've kept the same driver lineup for this year, and I've got to say I was pretty impressed with the test that they put on. The joint highest number of laps of any team in the sport, and with that new Ferrari power unit in the back of the car, they looked good. They really looked good. The only team to run faster in testing than they did at the Grand Prix itself back in 2020. They seemingly have made a big leap forward, potentially even getting themselves onto the back of that midfield pack and finding themselves competitive with some outfits that we might not have expected them to be. And one of those outfits may well be Alpine. Fernando Alonso marked his Formula One return with a mammoth session on day 2 of the test, coming back from the road traffic accident which he was involved with. Great to see him on track, good to see him fit, healthy, and absolutely gunning through the laps. Both he and Esteban Ocon getting on with the program pretty much trouble-free in the very interesting Alpine with the bulbous airbox, which brought to mind the Ligier JS5. Very sort of retro stylings there. Martin Bukowski saying that the team had really gotten through its program, really happy with everything, but they're an oddity because it's really difficult to be able to tell at the moment where they find themselves in the overall order. Of course, we always see this at the end of testing, but while they had reliability, while they had consistency and the car looked okay on track, it's not really setting off any massive fears in any of their rivals, and could find themselves middle to bottom of the midfield, certainly at the start of the season. But the drivers and the management are all pretty content with their 3 days work. The same cannot be said though for Aston Martin. Problems on all 3 days. Electrical, gearbox and boost pressure meant that their run plan was heavily curtailed, and team leader Sebastian Vettel was moved to comment that if he was a younger man in an earlier part of his career, he would have reason to be worried. The second slowest of all when you look at the times for the 3 days of testing. But of course, they didn't get to put in their super fast laps when the track was at its best on the final day because Vettel's car was up on the stands in the garage with that boost pressure issue. They also, though, and this is the bigger problem, ran the second fewest number of laps over the 3 days. They didn't get their full program done. They are on the back foot going into the season. It is not the sort of joyous entry to the year that they had been hoping for, potentially fighting with Alpine, maybe battling with Alfa Romeo. Of course, it's too early to really tell what's going on, but it wasn't as good a testing week as Aston Martin had hoped for. Now, Sebastian Vettel's old team, Ferrari, had honestly a pretty solid test, one of the highest run totals of any of the teams in the sport, but by far the biggest news out of that Bahrain test is that the team has overcome both the draggy nature of last year's car and, as we've said in relation to Haas and Alfa Romeo, they have a new power unit which is delivering on all fronts. It's night and day in comparison to last year's lump. While there is no suggestion that Ferrari will just be straight back to the front fighting for race wins and the championship, certainly the struggles that they had last year appear to be a thing of the past. They can go into this season with their head held high and confident of fighting at least at the front of the midfield. The only real problem for Ferrari is that the team it was fighting with over 6th place in the Constructors' Championship last year, Alpha Tauri, appears to have been the one which may have made the biggest gains over the winter into 2021. The ATO2 is the car that's got the entire paddock talking. They've spent their tokens wisely. They've taken the free upgrades that they're allowed to do as a customer team, and they have managed to adapt their 2020 chassis in such a way that it has really maximized the regulations to the limit of acceptability, and they've come out with a car that is reliable, super fast, and looks just incredibly together on track. Pierre Gasly and Yuki Tsunoda really happy with it. Tsunoda setting the second fastest time of the entire test, albeit deploying DRS incredibly early on the straights. But it was the race runs at Gasly's hand that really got tongues wagging. there's a lot of fear in the midfield over what Alpha Tauri can do in 2021. The potential of that car and that team right now, one of the biggest talking points coming out of testing. Top of the midfield pack though, and arguably the champions of testing, at least one of them at least, is McLaren. Of course, they had the most to do over the winter. The only team to change engine supplier, and of course taking up all of their token spend on that change from Renault to Mercedes power. They had as close to a perfect test as you could probably have. They got through their entire run plan. Nothing really went wrong. The car drove well, looked great, drivers happy. It's about as good a test as you could possibly have. As I said, the car also looks wicked fast. Sure, on the overall list of the top times, it's not setting the world on fire, but every time it was out on track, it looked uber competitive, and the drivers both look really happy and really confident, as does Andreas Seidel as the team boss. There's a quiet confidence in McLaren. Maybe not that they'll be fighting for the championship, but certainly that podiums, possibly more, could and should be in the offing for 2021. There isn't a person in the paddock who isn't expecting good things from McLaren Mercedes in 2021. The real champions of testing were, though, of course, Red Bull Racing. Super fast, super reliable, a new Honda engine that is delivering serious oomph, and no hint of that instability, that sketchiness at the rear which had so blighted their 2020 testing schedule. For too long, Red Bull has entered a season on the back foot, and there is a feeling in 2021 that for the first time in a long time that will not be the case. The RB16B looks every bit a championship contender. The drivers are happy, the team is happy. For the first time in a long time, we're going into a season where Red Bull might be, if not sole, joint championship favourite. So the only real unknown, the only real question mark is over Mercedes. Despite suggestions that after gearbox issues blighted their early running, they turned everything down and fueled the car up. There's no getting around the fact that the Mercedes W12 seems to have inherited that skittish, unstable rear that Red Bull have managed to dial out of the RB16B. It wasn't a happy test for Mercedes in any way, and particularly not for Lewis Hamilton, who actually looked the less comfortable and the less confident of the team's two drivers. There was a suggestion from some teams as we were leaving the paddock at the end of the test that Mercedes were waiting for today's filming day at the track to bring some surprising new elements onto the car. Of course, we all remember years gone by where Mercedes brought one car to week 1 of the test and another car to week 2 of the test. Perhaps people thought they didn't do their shakedown before the test because they're actually going to do their shakedown of their real car or of the real aero parts after those 3 days of testing. However, having seen the car in use at today's filming day in Bahrain by Mercedes, it is the same car. They're using a different track layout as well, the outer loop, meaning they're not doing that fast, medium high-speed change of direction downhill through which the car was looking a little bit unstable. So even if they had put anything new from an aerodynamic perspective on it, they wouldn't have got much of a feel for whether they dialed out those problems. This is just a filming day. So the problems that they have, which they had dialed out to some extent by the end of the week, they have them still. Toto Wolff has said they've discovered a hair in their soup. The question is, are they just going to be able to fish the hair out of their soup, or have they got to send it back and get a new bowl of soup out of the kitchen? That is the big question mark going into this season. One question around why they should have got into this state that they're in is over the rake, the angle of the rake on the car, because Mercedes has always run a very flat car. Red Bull famously with the high rake at the rear of the car. In order to get around this reduction in downforce at the back, the new floor regulations, it seems that running some form of rake on the car is a means around this. If Mercedes have had to put that onto their car, something that they have never done and always taken their car in a direction away from that, could that potentially be what they are having to get their heads around and having to understand? Could that be what is creating that rear instability? There is a thought process that yes, that is exactly what the issue is, but time will tell. Be under no illusions though, Mercedes are not entering this in any way as bullish as they normally are. And this isn't like 2 years ago where we came into the season thinking that Ferrari were the favourites and Mercedes absolutely smashed them. It's also not like last year where we sort of, looked at Ferrari and said, oh, they've got problems. The first race is going to be problematic, and everyone thought they'll get over it. It'll be fine by the first race. And it was really terrible. It's somewhere in between the two. Mercedes haven't forgotten how to make a fast race car. They haven't forgotten how to win world championships. But the W12, there is a question mark over whether it will be the favourite when we get back to racing in 2 weeks' time. If anyone can come back from a difficult testing period, though, we know it to be Mercedes. With that said, cannot wait for that first race of the season. Just 3 days of pre-season testing done and dusted. Formula 1 2021 starts in just over a week now, until we will be in our first practice session of the 2021 season. Now, while we talk testing, let's shift our attentions momentarily to MotoGP. High winds meant the final day of the test in Qatar was cancelled, but we did get a good look before then at the runners and riders for the 2021 season. Much of the field carrying its 2020 tech over into 2021, with only KTM and Aprilia bringing new engines into the mix. Yamaha will thus struggle again, we would assume, with its underpowered engines, but does at least appear to have a better chassis underneath it in 2021. Maverick Vinales, second fastest during testing, stating that his comfort levels had increased massively. But despite some positivity from him, the reaction across all four drivers was mixed, I think is the best way to say that. Over at Ducati, Jack Miller set a new official lap record, with many seeing him as the title favourite. His race pace was good, front ends improved, and he is feeling very confident indeed. Miller, though, is mindful of the threat posed by Espargaro and Honda, who he noted as the standout performers of the test. Despite a fairly quiet test, there's no underestimating Suzuki either, and the threat that the champions carry over into this year, despite the fact that they've lost Davide Brivio, their team principal, to Alpine in Formula 1. Both drivers, though, were unhappy with elements of the new chassis, and as such, that new bike might not actually see the light of day until later in the season. We understand they may run the old one for the first few races. Aprilia's new engine, meanwhile, gives them hope of springing a shock. KTM, on the other hand, had a relatively kind of quiet, underwhelming test. Many people believe they are hiding their true pace, but time will tell. Of course, the test took place without Marc Marquez, but today he has been on a bike at Barcelona as he attempts to get over his injuries and get back to racing ways for the start of the season. In the World Endurance Championship, news last week that the new season will now begin in Spa, with Portimao having been moved to June. Meanwhile, Corvette Racing has announced its return to the Le Mans 24 Hours in 2021 in the GTE Pro class. A 62 car entry has been unveiled for Le Mans. That's a mammoth entry list for Le Mans. Le Mans, of course, now taking place in August. In order to fully prepare for Le Mans, Corvette will also field a car at Spa for the season opener. Now to Formula E, where there has been a renewed call from the drivers to adapt the sport's qualifying format, which currently effectively penalises those at the top of the championship, because there's a fear that it could really affect the title run-in towards the end of the season. Rapid track evolution is also creating sort of slightly convoluted or Some people feel kind of gimmicky grid shake-ups, which the argument goes kind of flies in the face of the purity of the show. In addition to complaints being levied about the qualifying system, the drivers have also raised some concerns over the fact that the number of tyres available to them has been depleted this year in an aid to sort of improve sustainability. This will only increase as the sport looks ahead to Gen 3. In other Formula E news, the Dutch city of Eindhoven has moved a step closer to hosting a round of the championship, with a letter written by members of the Dutch government being sent to Formula E organisers backing Formula E's move to Eindhoven at some point in the future. IndyCar now, and at Barber Motorsports Park, Ganassi's IndyCar drivers conducted a test session with Scott Dixon leading the way and Jimmy Johnson in his final pre-season test, just 1.3 seconds off Scott Dixon's time. There are just 4 more tests before the IndyCar season gets underway, but 3 of them are on ovals. Only 1 remains on a road course, and only Carlin and Dale Coyne will be present at that test. The championship's 7 road course events in 2021, meanwhile, have been confirmed to be reduced to just 2-day events, including the doubleheader at Detroit. That's a result of both cost and COVID considerations. In NASCAR, Kyle Larson, who was actually fired by Ganassi and suspended by NASCAR itself for the vast majority of 2020, took his number 5 Hendrick Motorsports Chevrolet to the win at the Las Vegas Motor Speedway. In the British Touring Car Championship, 3-time champion Gordon Shedden returns to the series in 2021, and he does so for Team Dynamics, who just a week or so ago, of course, made that shock announcement that Dan Camish would not be returning for them. In other news, a rejigged calendar now sees a 5-week break between the opening rounds of the championship season, and that is because BTCC want to try and get as many fans to as many events as they can in 2021. And with the UK finally coming out of lockdown, finally having restrictions lifted, the hope is that by delaying the proper full start of the season, they can get as many fans in as they can. In the DTM, Lucas Auer will race for Mercedes customer team Winward, and Christian Klein will also join the championship and will also be at the wheel of a Mercedes. And in Extreme E, with just 2 weeks to go until the start of their season, Techeetah has announced that it is going to delay its participation in the championship, citing COVID-19 and Glovid's not a word. Global travel restrictions. Got all the way through them without screwing it up. And that, folks, is just about that for this episode. I would love to have taken you for a walk, but quarantine restrictions on returning to the UK for those of us even with elite sports exemptions means that I have to stay in my house for a good few days yet. So thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in. Leave some comments down below as to whether you want to see these things continue throughout the season, if it's bringing you the information that you want, anything we can do to make the changes and get you what you want to see. Please let me know. I read all the questions and the comments and the queries. Thank you for your feedback. Thank you for following along. Hope you've enjoyed it. F1 testing is over, their season just around the corner. The motorsports world ramping up to begin its 2021 seasons across the globe. Cannot wait for them all to start. For now though, from us, that's pretty much it. And hopefully we will see you next week for the next episode of This Week